the 8 issues of the Challengers to figure out how we were going to work best. There was a lot of no, 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 no. Okay.
On both sides?
No. He actually drew a very amusing, like a 27-panel grid. No, 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 no. Yes. The way in which we work, he entitled it. But it really got honed, and one of the things, he was in LA, I was in Seattle, and one of the ways that it worked was that it was, this is before faxes even, so it was all over the phone, and he would take a credit card and put squares on a yellow legal pad, rectangles, and that would be a page, and he'd scribble, and then he'd call me and describe a page. And so we got to know each other really a lot better. I'm a little bit older than he is, but we're pretty much the same age. And so we had a lot of the same movie and comic references and to go on. And
but you had to do a lot of communication over the phone to be able to
yes,
get your ideas.
Learned a lot
to
that
each
way.
other.
Yeah. And it that really helped solidify us as a team.
So you really get to know what's going on in his head.
The first Batman I did was I'd met James Robinson at the beginning of his comics career. And we would chat every once in a while on the phone, and he told me at one point that he'd sold a script to Batman Legends of the Dark Knight. And I said, "You got an artist?" And so we did the Blades storyline. And I told Jeff, and he was so insanely jealous that I think Jeff, that was the next sort of big thing, was that Jeff began to be concerned that I would go off and do other stuff, and he didn't have anybody else that he had been working with. Now it's, of course, ridiculous. He's worked with everybody and made a lot more money with everybody else, and head of Marvel Television and things like that. But it was through the phone, which was of necessity, and he paid the bills, thank goodness.
And how would you get your ideas back to him? Would you mail pencils or art or?
Yeah, you know, it faxing came in when we were working on Chow's, and I just couldn't believe, it was before the internet or anything, and I just couldn't believe that you could stick a picture in somewhere and it would come out somewhere else.
Where does it go?
It's just amazing to me. But even then, it was pretty simple. So I had to make Xeroxes and mail those, and DC and Marvel would tend to pay for FedEx, so at least it wouldn't be that long. But at the beginning, there was a lot of redrawing, and I learned pretty quickly not to try to add too much to his. He'd be open to a certain amount of it, but I didn't want to spend time drawing on something and have him go. And this is just a standard joke, because years later, I'm jumping around here, but years later when we worked together on the Heroes TV show, and the director would say, "That's great. Can you move it in just move the camera 20 degrees to the left? Just shift the axis."
In your art.
In the art, yeah. And I went through that with Jeff at the beginning, because he had a film background, even though he had read comics all his life, like I had. And so I said to Jeff then, "Oh, you mean redraw it?" And I heard Jeff say that to directors on the TV show. And eventually we figured it out on the show that film it first, and then I'll draw it from screen grabs, that kind of thing. Everybody's easier, you know, that way.
Do you like to get
so that kind of process of, you know, learning.
Back and forth.
He was never a big fan of, except for like explosion sound effects, not a phone ringing or something. There's no sound, right? There's no actual movement. And so the ways you have to tell a story differently. We'd have people on the phone, but they would be on the phone when the scene began.
Right.
For instance,
there wouldn't be the ringing.
The ring.
Off screen.
Right.
Do you like to work with a lot of direction? like with a writer who gives you ideas for angles and ideas, or do you like to kind of?
Unless yeah, sure. And Jeff will request things. Often now it's much more minimal, and he never wrote. It was, we'd talk about it. He never wrote a lot of direction.
You get the big long scripts.
Or he'd often say something like, "You remember that Batman drawing in issue something that Neil Adams did? Why don't you do something like that?" Or,
I'm sure at this point now you really know what he's looking for, and he knows what you
pretty much
how you do, and
pretty much.
That's cool. So it's pretty familiar.
And also, I'm very old school in storytelling, and I really kind of think it's kind of a lost art with a lot of younger people drawing now, even a lot of very established people. It's not a part of what they concentrate on. And so a lot of times they'll just, well, be honest about it. A lot of times that if you guys get pissed off at a lot of expository writing, people covering up some beautiful artwork, it's because somebody had to explain what was going on, because it's not there in the art. And even people like, really popular people like McGinnis or Joe Mad or like that, that's not what they are known for. And then the writer gets blamed for
putting in too much caption.
Yeah, or dialogue or whatever. And so that I sort of, dating myself here, but it sort of the image school of how to do, the old image school of how to do comics, where the art was really selling the whole thing. Then somehow there'd be a story.
Graft a story onto it somehow.
But they sold 1 million copies. I mean, it was hard to sort of argue with that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have an artist that can actually tell a story through the art, then you don't need to have as much. Here's what's happening behind the scenes, even though we're not showing it.
And the writer can then assume that's going to be the case and write a different kind of story.
Right. He doesn't have to put in all that.
So that there are, people that people will be sometimes say to both Jeff and I very flatteringly and kindly that they think that our best work is with each other. And Jeff does get a little, I sold 8 billion copies with this guy over here, and 40,000 copies with you over here. 40,000 now would be.
That'd be great.
But anyway.
Right. Look at the numbers.
But I think it's, whether or not it's for you, it certainly is different. And he knows that he can write differently for me. So
that's good, and I'm sure that's why it's always a pleasure for you to, if it is a pleasure.
Very much. Very much.
You mentioned Heroes. I don't know if everybody knows, but you did the artwork for the psychic artist, drug addict Isaac Mendez.
Well, and that was the first and only sort of really decent season. I think we're all we all agree about that. That's not a secret. It's not a secret.
Would have been a great one.
But then they decided to kill him and go in a different direction. But all the rest of the artwork I also did. It just wasn't, obviously.
Right. How did you get that job?
Through Jeff. Jeff had known Tim Kring for decades. Tim actually wrote Teen Wolf 2, the much beloved.
Well, there you go. It was a passing
Jason
of the torch.
Bateman. He was just out of film school, and he came and took notes from Jeff and Jeff's writing partner, and then went off and wrote the script. That was all put together by the studio and stuff. That wasn't
panel
to
called
blame
How to
anybody
Write a Teen
on
Wolf movie. That's good.
Anyway, but Kring had this long-running show, Crossing Jordan, and it was on NBC, and nobody watched NBC, and it was a 10-year show. So he was doing something new, and he knew that art was going to be a part of it. Kring did. He knew that and he'd never read a comic book, and he knew that it had all these sort of superpower-y things. Right. So he had long conversations with Jeff And Jeff's legend is they took this long walk, and Crane kept saying, well, I got this one guy, he's got these magnetic powers, he can move things all over the place. Jeff said he can't do that. I got this girl turns invisible, and she's married to this scientist. No, you can't do that. I got this blind guy, and he swings around. He's got radar. You know, that kind of stuff. And so Kring made the good sense to hire people who did know comics. I worked on the pilot. Well, anyway, Jeff called me and said, here's this going on. Tim wants some illustrations for the actual pilot script for him to send to NBC. Try to help nudge it along. So I talked to Kring, and I did a few drawings, one of which was the atom bomb.
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew, they called me to come up to his office on the Universal lot. And the first thing they asked me was, do you paint? And I said, no, I'm colorblind, which is true. And they went,
But
let me show you something. There's a computer over there on the desk, and let me show you something. And we went to my website, which I no longer have, unfortunately, but there was examples of Daredevil Yellow up there. And so with ink wash, you can computerize it and make it look like paint. And they said, okay, great. And in that room was David Semmel, who was the director, Kring, a couple of other assistants and things like that. And they had already had a go on the pilot. So I worked on the pilot. Jeff came in when it became a series. But Jeff set it up.
So who did they get to do the colors?
Oh, I got Dave Stewart to do the colors.
There you go.
They tried to, essentially I was part of the props department, and they had some people who could do some Photoshop in the props department, but they, no. Especially when you put it up next to Dave Stewart, it's not going to.
Right, no. People are going to, especially comics fans, you know they're going to be in the audience. They're going to be able to tell.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't sure if anybody would know I was doing anything. There's a credit, but you know the credits now are like this, squeezed down. And some people say they could recognize it. Some people saw it there.
Did anybody recognize your handwriting?
Not that I know of.
From the
and you can go buy that, you know.
from the titles, like where they set the state, Odessa, Texas.
The credits,
yeah.
right at the beginning, produced by, written by.
And you can buy that now.
That's the Tim Sale font, Tim Sale brush font.
Fancy.
This is Richard Starkings, who runs Comic Craft and does Elephant Men for Image. He also has a production company, and he came up as a letterer and was the pioneer, biggest pioneer of computer lettering. And years ago, he said that he wanted to create fonts for each artwork, for each artist.
That's crazy.
Based on their own lettering.
Yeah.
Well, because he thought that anything he could do to make the lettering look more a part of the art, which he really believes it is, the better.
Absolutely.
And if Travis Charest, for instance, I find almost unreadable his lettering, but it's what he chose to do, and they created a font by it. And you can go, anybody can go buy it for $50 online.
And put it together with your art that looks nothing like his. And,
yeah, I mean, it's a little odd to do that, but since if the whole point is that it
works
fits
as a
the
piece of his
artist's,
art, yeah.
you know, thing. But
that's cool. It's a good souvenir.
no, that was a surprise to me. They didn't tell me they were doing that.
Really?
Yeah.
That they were making a font, or they were going to use your handwriting?
No. The font was already there, had been used,
But
but
they were
they were
use that.
using Heroes. That was a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, it made it seem a lot more. It really brought the whole comic book vibe together for that. That was great. Moving on to your process. When you start your artwork, how much prep do you do? Do you do thumbnails? Do you do rough? I mean, how tight are your
I've worked
pencils?
different ways, different times. I usually will in the margins of the script, I will do thumbnails of a page. Sometimes it's just panel layout with a word or something.
Right.
Sometimes there are little doodles in it. But really, at different times, depending on how comfortable I am, I'll work relatively small, like 5x7, then blow that up and lightbox it. I could never have done. The last time I really was good at meeting deadlines, especially on a monthly book, was Dark Victory. But all throughout Dark Victory, Superman for All Seasons, and Long Halloween, I was penciling and inking on a monthly schedule. So I couldn't afford to do it any other way than just starting right on the board. I used to pencil more loosely, and because I was going to ink my own stuff, to let the ink be a real, more kind of lively thing. And it turned out I wasn't as good as I thought I was, and there would be a lot of bad drawing underneath the. So I pencil more tightly now, but I don't fill in blacks or anything. But I'll take my time with
the line itself.
Yeah, I'm pretty. My biggest single weakness, I think, is symmetry, and just making things match. Anything from a face to a car or something, and there's nothing worse than looking at something you've done and just go, oh, because your eye will fool you. You'll get used to thinking
as you're doing it
that this looks good.
What do you?
Well,
that's
that works.
self-esteem,
That
I
works.
think, yeah. What is you? What
no,
do you,
no,
what do
believe
you
me,
do?
I'm okay with.
But
what's
your trick?
Messed it up, you've messed it up. Well, different people have different things. The biggest thing for me is if you can afford to let it sit for a couple days, then coming back to it. But people will hold it up to, turn it around, hold it up to a light, so you're seeing the reverse image, or you hold it up to a mirror, see the reverse, and that shows a shocking amount of.
I've heard people do that hold it upside down, so you don't.
You
don't
see the
superimpose a face. You see the actual.
Right,
lines
but
of the
that's more design, and I'm
You're okay
pretty
with that?
set with that. It's the drawing flaws, the symmetry, those eyes are way too far apart or way too close together, or especially if you're going to extreme close up or
You have to be really
something
detailed
like
about
that. Well, you have to be very careful to make sure about that kind of stuff. Shrinking it down helps too. But letting it sit is the biggest thing for me.
If you can get some distance from it.
Yeah,
for a little bit.
yeah.
That makes sense. Well, how has your style changed since you first began, besides penciling tighter?
Well, I've pretty much always inked myself. Not in the beginning. I just had to try to scrape together 2 nickels, and so I would do whatever. So I knew that, and I was always drawn to a very design sense of black and white. So it's not, the simplest way to do it is to say shadows, but it isn't so much that as the black shapes are not just shading on the underside of a nose, or they're a part of the, and a more dramatic part of the image than a lot of people do now, especially with computer, that's almost never done.
Like a chiaroscuro?
Well, Alex Toth was a big influence on me, also colorblind, by the way.
That's the secret, if you can make that happen.
John Byrne, colorblind. Well, comics are great in that way because somebody else usually colors it.
Exactly.
So
Keeps you out of the coloring business.
and also, like everybody, I started out imitating everything that I was excited by for 15 years probably, before getting into comics and then after getting into comics.
Right.
And then I had to try to find my way as and right around Superman for All Seasons, I started looking at a lot more illustration art outside of comics. And Norman Rockwell was the obvious influence on Superman, but a lot of different a lot of different people, how designy they were. They were all telling a story. It wasn't sequential, but just one image would tell an awful lot of
You have
what
to
was
tell
going
a lot in
on.
a single image.
Yeah,
in a lot of
absolutely.
ways.
And make it dramatic, and so that influenced me a lot.
Oh, that's good.
And then technically, the biggest thing was ink wash. And I was joking with Richard Starkings today about ruined my life, which is not true, obviously, but you're essentially inking it twice and trying to meet a deadline.
You're adding another layer to your job.
Yeah,
Good.
and yeah, it looks cool, and I enjoy doing it, but it's a lot of work for the same amount of money. You don't get paid to ink it twice. And so that's a drag. And also I kind of missed dramatic, just black and white. I'd like to be able to have somebody write something like that for me.
Do
But
people,
so Daredevil changed a lot
Yeah.
for me in that way.
do writers now insist or ask directly for ink wash? Because they know you do
Some
it
people,
or
well, I don't work with that many other people, but people assume it's going to be
Mhm.
washed pretty much.
do you have a reputation to uphold now? It's tough.
Good and bad.
Yeah.
Well, like when Jim Lee began Deathblow,
Mhm.
the clear influence was Sin City and Frank Miller. Jim was the most popular artist on the face of the planet. Completely changed his art style. I thought he did it really pretty well,
Mhm.
except for how derivative of Sin City was. But Jim can draw like crazy,
Yeah.
and but nobody cared. Well, people don't. You become known for something. and
Mhm. Yeah.
I've seen Rob Liefeld's sketches. Really good. And I said, Rob, and he said, I've made millions of dollars drawing this way. I let people talk the way they want to talk. Got a beautiful family.
That's a rumor. That's a
I
behind the
created
scenes.
Deadpool. But I'm telling you,
Right.
it was unrecognizable to me. I
It's
couldn't
amazing.
believe it.
Yeah, you do, and that happens in, I think, with any artist. You get known
Does,
for a
yeah,
particular
absolutely.
style, and people expect that. And if you branch away from that,
Yep.
you move away from that style, you're letting down people who grew up or got to know you that way.
Well, if there's anything, any single thing you can sort of point to for me is that I've worked in different ways most of the time, and
Mhm.
so I chafe a little bit at this is all we want now.
Is it that
But
Tim
you know,
Sale style?
Spider-Man Blue was a real different thing.
Mhm.
Superman Confidential with Darwin. I knew I didn't want to do the same Superman as the For All Seasons
Right.
Superman. So you know, I want to change things around like that.
Oh, that makes sense. Realism, does it have a place in comic book art? Or how do you decide? How do you decide how realistic to make your art? How
I am
stylistic?
not concerned about that at all. First of all, the only real thing is the paper. It's not actually somebody, right? So it's a odd term. I first heard it in comics with Neil Adams, and that just meant that there was some photo reference, but also he was the first guy that I knew that would use double lighting, and Steranko would fool around with that stuff too. This is all 60s sort of stuff that was just tremendously innovative at the time. But I always mistrusted calling it real.
It's symbolic.
I know
matter
what
what.
you, yeah. But my stuff is more, I think of it as expressionistic, sort of. Because it's not cartoony, but it's clearly a drawing.
Right.
And it's meant to exaggerate things for emotional and or intellectual effect.
Brings out existing interior qualities.
Yes,
Makes them
which is
more
all part of
manifest.
storytelling.
Mhm.
So that one of the reasons that I like drawing Batman so much is the cape and so there's so many things you can do. You know, the cape is 30 feet long or 5 feet long, depending on what's going on.
I was going to ask you about that. What was it the characteristics of Batman that you enjoy, or that symbolize the character to you, that really make the figure?
Well, a lot of it. Certainly, just from the artwork point of view, I've always been drawn to noir looks and stories. So the tortured little boy, who's now the tortured middle-aged man, the tragedy that shaped his life that he never gets over, but crime stories, you know, and Jeff really lashed onto that too, with the whole Godfather influences.
There's a lot of blacks in Gotham City.
Yeah, and plus a lot of people
shadows.
skulking around. And a lot of you see a lot of the city. I really like drawing cities.
A lot of personality.
Yeah.
Put a lot of personality into Gotham City, certainly over some of the other
Yeah,
locations.
well, Daredevil was the one that I really, and the reason I chose to do it in Wash was that I wanted it to be a kind of ode to New York. And actually, the towers came down while we were drawing it. There's a shot where he's standing on top of, in one of the issues where he's standing on top of the Chrysler building. And he's looking south, and the towers are there. And before that was printed, but after it was drawn, they came down, and there was a lot of debate up at Marvel
Right, I bet.
about what are we going to do, but they kept it. I think that was the right choice, but wow, yeah.
Right, it must have been.
But it was an ode to all the brick and the great architecture that's actually in the city, and I thought Wash would really bring a lot of that out.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. A few more minutes. Are there characters that you would like to take a crack at? Any publisher, honestly, any medium, if you wanted to do a comic book of a movie or something?
Well, I still am exclusive with Marvel, so after Cap is done, I'm not sure yet what I'm doing. So we'll see. We've kind of hit the biggies. But there are a lot of, I grew up just reading Marvel. Doctor Strange, you know, but there are a number of things.
There's a lot of stuff. Doctor Strange always has flowing capes and shadows.
And it's
weird
open to
stuff.
open to as far as your imagination can take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I don't have for him is a sort of personal backstory that hooks me. But I fought Superman. Jeff wanted to do Superman from way back, and I kept saying no. And then I thought of the Rockwell angle. And how many people here know Paul Chadwick? His work? Okay. He did a book called Concrete, but he also did a story that he wrote, a very short Christmas story in some DC annual of Superman, where he rescues there's an old man caught in his car in a snowdrift. And it turns out the old man wants to die because he wants his wife to get insurance money. And there's more to the story, obviously. And Superman comes down, gets in the car, talks him out of it. Heats up the engine block, you know, gets him out. And I thought that was a great Superman story. And I said, "That's okay. I can see that." And then once I put it together with the Rockwell and a kind of Americana, sort of a movie version of Americana,
Right.
or a Rockwell version, that made sense to me.
Very wholesome.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, family's important and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it says in the description of the panel, I think I'm obligated to ask, what's next for Tim Sale?
Well, I just sort of answered that. I don't know.
Got Cap
I think I know at some point I want to do a creator-owned noir series. I don't really have the emotional core of it yet. I just know how it's going to look. I'll probably do it in Wash, but I'll probably do it in a lot of different. It's not going to be Sin City, but it'll be more like a movie like Out of the Past or noir movies.
Right.
A guy, a girl, gun, romance, tragedy. You know.
Classic.
And I've been calling that the killing floor. I'm not sure I'm going to go with that. It's a great old Howlin' Wolf song that I've always liked, and it's about the slaughterhouse floor.
Mm.
That's what the killing floor was termed on, which is so evocative of a noir.
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
So I don't. That's as good as I got right now. The how many people saw my issue of Solo, which got collected really nicely? There's a noir story in there, written by Brian Azzarello, and you go check that out. That's the kind of thing that's in my head for this.
So, do you do a lot of collaboration on story? I know that you go back and forth with your writer on the art and the layouts and stuff like that. But do you actually?
No, we used to do when we were talking a lot, and believe me, we talked every day for years. Just sort of bouncing stuff around, and then he would write it, and I'd have notes, and he'd have notes to me, but they were always pretty minimal.
Right.
So we knew the kind of thing that we wanted to do, but no, I wouldn't be.
That doesn't sound like Batman. I think Batman should do this.
Well, then it's a different story, isn't it?
Yeah. It's
That
not
kind of
just
thing.
story,
That
yeah.
kind of thing, right?
Right. So.
And yeah, he's very proprietary about. Rightly so,
I know.
I think.
It's his story.
But yeah,
But for the killing floor, are you looking to? You're coming up with a core concept, though, right?
yes. The idea is that there's a milieu, and anybody could play in that milieu. It's not all going to be in one city or.
The shared universe sort of thing.
Well, shared universes are. My first work in comics that I penciled was Thieves' World. And if anybody knows that, it was a successful series of paperback short stories of a shared universe in a kind of coastal, pre-medieval town.
Very D&D.
Very D&D, yeah. And not so much monsters, but monstrous people and magic, definitely magic. There were some winged people and things like that, but somebody made up that world and then invited other writers to write stories within the world. But they wouldn't. The attraction for the writers would be they didn't have to recreate everything. They wanted to write a story. So.
But for Killing Floor, it's going to be.
Well, there were,
different
but
from that.
not in my head now. It won't be okay. This is all takes place in
These are the
one
rules.
evening. This all this all takes place in one particular place, and this is what the economic, social, political
What's going on right
background
now.
is.
This
Yeah,
world.
no, it's more emotionally thematic kind of thing.
Excellent.
And I would absolutely want to write some and work with other people. So
Sounds good. Hope we can get that to come out of your head and onto the
it,
paper.
it will at some point.
Got a few minutes for questions. If anybody has questions for Mr. Sale, step on up or probably just yell.
Yeah, we quiet enough in here.
I'll repeat it.
Up. Yep.
You've done a lot of fantastic interior work, but your cover work is also very distinctive, very striking. I mean, I've got your most recent Batman stuff on my computer background right now. It really pops. So, in your personal opinion, do you prefer doing that one panel, really striking image cover, or the details on the interior?
Maybe more now. I like the covers a little bit, but that goes in and out, up and down. You know, it's funny you should say that because for a long time, I didn't really have much of a clue about covers, and the single thing that changed it most was Long Halloween. It was Jeff's idea to have a holiday on each cover. And I don't think I did a very good job on the Superman covers at all. The For All Seasons covers. I like the confidential covers. And that was because I didn't have a hook, and it just bugged me because, well, it's seasons. It's got to be easy enough to. I couldn't figure it out. And but then Dark Victory, I couldn't figure out, and then I saw an old poster. It's actually a series of movie posters for The Godfather, where they super saturated photographs of the actors, and then put one really bright color. Everything else is black. So there's a Brando. There's a. I think maybe the only other one is Michael. But I just thought, well, okay. And so that's exactly what I did. And once I had that idea, I did all the covers in 3 or 4 days or something. So.
All right, thank you. Any more questions? Sir.
What happened to Captain America 1?
There's one more issue.
It's the deadliest question.
They wanted to get it all done.
So Marvel's hanging on until they're ready to blow. Yeah.
Still working.
It's been how long?
Been a few years.
I feel like I haven't seen anything for like 2 years.
It's more than 2 years.
Hope that helps. It's coming, it's coming. Then it's going to be awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
Fantastic to meet you. I'm also colorblind, and I have trouble buying bananas in the store. So,
Right?
I can't do tomatoes.
Right. So, I mean, how challenging was that for you? I mean, I realize you rely on someone else for color a lot of the time. But
It's not that challenging. Where I used to run into it all the time was that Jeff would say that's not that color, or I don't like that color because it's, and if I didn't agree, he'd just dismiss it with "you're colorblind," and then I'd talk to the, and then I'd talk to the colorist, and the colorist says, "No, that's blue." Well, would you mind telling Jeff that that's, you know? I mean, because you get into things like it's too purpley, it should be more violety. Well, it's all in the blue, and I can. That's where I can say, "Look, I can't." Brown was his big thing that he hated as a kind of dead color. But he worships Neil Adams. And Neil's browns on covers are so rich. It's not chocolate, I don't know what it is, but it's so great. And as a contrast to certain yellows and things like that. I said, what about that? Well, that's not brown. So, but that, no, it doesn't. I'll have notes for colorists, but it'll be just stuff like his shirt should always be white. I don't like fingernail polish on women. Men, it's awesome.
All right. Shaking.
You know, things like that, or this should be dark, you know, blues or whatever.
Just general sort of color-eyed
This is the mood.
comments. Very cool.
Spears tie should always be red.
All right, I think that's all the time we have. Coming up next is Kurt Busick, but I'd like to say thank you to Tim Sale for coming and talking with us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
sorry
enjoy
I'm
the
late.
show.